It was one of those neighborhoods where everyone knew everyone. People had lived there for years, some even for decades. Kids grew up playing on the same cracked sidewalks where their parents once played. Everyone had their role. There was the old lady who sat on her porch counting how many cars passed by each hour. The barber who heard all the gossip before anyone else did. And of course there was Mr. Don, the man everyone said ran the block. He wasn't a bad person, just someone who liked being in charge. If someone needed help fixing a roof, he'd send a few guys over and make sure everyone knew he did it. If a family ran short on money, he'd lend some, but he made sure they never forgot who saved them. People respected him, but also feared him a little. That's just how things worked. He had power, and power on that block meant people listened. Then one quiet morning, everything started to change. A moving truck pulled up to the corner house that had been empty for almost 2 years. The place looked tired. Paint peeling, yard full of weeds, and a fence half falling apart. Most neighbors didn't pay much attention. They figured someone new was just trying to get by like everyone else. But when they saw the man who moved in, they couldn't help but notice how different he was. He wasn't young, but not old either. His clothes were plain, and jeans, simple shirts, nothing fancy. He didn't talk much. The first few days, people only saw him outside, fixing broken shutters, cleaning up trash, cutting the wild grass that had taken over the yard. He worked quietly, never asking for help. And when someone walked by, he'd just nod politely with a small smile. The kids started calling him the quiet man on the corner. No one knew where he came from, what he did, or why he'd move into a neighborhood like this one. But there was something about him. Calm, steady, like he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. At first, Mr. Don didn't care. He had his stores, his connections, his people. But one afternoon, he passed by and saw the new guy talking to a few of the teenagers who usually hung around the convenience store. They were laughing. Not the usual kind of laughter that came from teasing or showing off. This was genuine. Mr. Don didn't like that. He'd worked hard to keep those kids under his wing, and now here was this stranger earning their attention. The next few days, things began to shift in small ways. One morning, the neighbors woke up to find someone had swept the entire block clean. Trash bins were lined neatly by the curb. The sidewalks looked brighter somehow. No one knew who did it, but people started whispering that they'd seen the quiet man out before sunrise. A few days later, a stray dog that usually barked all night was suddenly calm, sleeping peacefully on the man's porch. Someone said he'd fed it and built a small shelter out of old wood. It was the kind of small act no one noticed much, but it made people talk. By the second week, curiosity had taken over the whole block. Some folks tried to talk to him, but he didn't share much. He'd just smile and ask how their day was. It was strange. People weren't used to someone who actually listened. It made them feel seen. One evening, while the sun was setting and the air smelled of grilled food from nearby houses, the quiet man was out painting his fence. A group of kids rode by on bikes, teasing each other. One of them hit a bump and fell. Before anyone could move, the man had already dropped his brush and rushed over. He helped the kid up, checked his knee, and gave him a clean bandage from his pocket, like he'd done this before. The boy's mother ran over, thanking him again and again. He just nodded and said, "He's a tough one," before going back to his fence. That small moment spread across the block faster than any rumor. People started seeing him differently. He wasn't just some stranger, he cared. Quietly, but deeply. Mr. Don, however, didn't like the attention shifting. For years, he'd been the one everyone turned to when something needed fixing or solving. Now it seemed like people were starting to talk about someone else. He tried to find out more. He asked around, but no one knew much. The man didn't hang out at the barber shop, didn't sit outside gossiping, and never went to the bar down the street. He kept to himself, yet somehow he was everywhere. Then something strange happened. One night, a group of teenagers decided to break into one of Mr. Don's storage sheds. It wasn't the first time someone had tried, but this time things went differently. The next morning, the shed was untouched. The lock was replaced and a note was taped to the door that simply said, "We can do better than this." It wasn't signed. No one knew who wrote it, but the message spread around the neighborhood like wildfire. People whispered that the quiet man might have had something to do with it. A few days later, one of the boys who had tried to break in showed up helping the quiet man fix a fence. He didn't say much, just worked alongside him. Mr. Don noticed that too. Little by little, the block started to feel different. People began cleaning their yards again. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years started greeting each other. The atmosphere felt lighter somehow, and though no one said it aloud, everyone knew it had something to do with the quiet man on the corner. One afternoon, as the sun hung low and golden light spilled over the street, Mr. Don stopped by his shop and saw the man passing by. He decided it was time to find out more. "Hey, neighbor," he called out with his usual confident smile. "Haven't had the pleasure yet. You new around here?" The man turned, smiled politely, and said, "Yes, sir. Been here a few weeks now. Just trying to make this old place feel like home." Mr. Don nodded, sizing him up. "You've been busy. Folks are talking about you." "I hope in a good way," the man replied softly. Mr. Don chuckled. "People talk, that's what they do. Just making sure we're all on the same page here. This block's got its own rhythm. Everyone knows who's who, you know?" The man didn't say much, just smiled again. "That's good to know," he said, then tipped his head slightly and went back to his house. Mr. Don stood there for a moment watching him go. Something about the man's calmness made him uneasy. He wasn't disrespectful, but he wasn't intimidated either. That bothered him more than he wanted to admit. The next morning, a black car pulled up near the man's house. Two people in neat clothes stepped out, spoke to him briefly, and handed him a file. They shook hands and left. The neighbors saw it, of course. By the afternoon, the entire block was buzzing. Who was this man, really? Why were important-looking people visiting him? Some guessed he was a government worker. Others thought maybe he was a retired officer. One old man said he'd seen him before years ago, helping organize community projects downtown. No one knew for sure, and the mystery made everyone even more curious. That night, as the streetlights flickered on, the quiet man sat on his porch, watching kids play tag and neighbors chatting across fences. He smiled softly to himself. He seemed peaceful, like he belonged there all along, and while most people went about their usual evening, a few couldn't help but glance his way, wondering who he really was, and why things started feeling better ever since he arrived. Mr. Don sat inside his store that night, staring out the window. For the first time in a long while, he felt uncertain. People used to come to him for advice, for help, for permission even. But now they seemed to have found a new sense of independence. He didn't understand how one quiet man could cause so much change without saying a word. As the clock ticked past midnight, the neighborhood lay quiet and still. The only sound was the faint hum of streetlights and the soft rustle of wind moving through the trees. On the corner, the man turned off his porch light and went inside, leaving the block wrapped in silence, a silence that carried questions no one yet had the answers to. But one thing was clear. Something was shifting on that block, and soon enough everyone would find out exactly who really ran it. The quiet man had now been living on the block for almost a month. The first days, people watched him out of curiosity. Now they watched out of respect. They didn't fully understand why, but there was something about him that made people feel calm. He had this way of making others want to do better, without ever asking them to. One morning, a light drizzle covered the street. The air smelled like wet earth and blooming trees. The quiet man walked slowly, holding a small bag of tools. He stopped by the broken bench near the bus stop and began fixing it. A few neighbors passed by and waved. Usually people just ignored things like that, but now they stopped to talk. Within minutes, two men brought out some nails. Another woman offered paint, and by the end of the afternoon, the old bench looked brand new. It was a small thing, but it set off a chain reaction. The next day, someone cleaned up the trash around the mailboxes. A group of kids planted flowers in a cracked sidewalk pot. People started caring again. The quiet man never asked anyone to help, yet somehow his quiet actions made others want to join in. Across the street, Mr. Don noticed everything. He sat in his store pretending not to care, but inside he was irritated. For years he had been the one everyone thanked. Now people were whispering about the man on the corner. They called him neighbor, with a kind of warmth that Mr. Don hadn't heard directed at himself in a long time. That evening, Mr. Don called a few of his usual friends, men who worked at his shops and liked to hang around his office. They sat around drinking tea and talking. One of them mentioned the quiet man. "People are saying he used to work for the city," one said. "Others think he's got connections with those charity groups downtown," another added. Mr. Don leaned back in his chair. Whatever he is, he's changing how people see me. That's not good for business, one of his friends laughed. Come on, Don, he's just fixing benches. People will forget in a week. But Mr. Don didn't laugh. He knew better. Influence was like a shadow. Once someone else's got bigger than yours, people stopped seeing you. The next morning, as the sun broke through the clouds, the quiet man was walking toward the small grocery shop when he saw two teenagers arguing near the alley. Their voices were loud and one of them shoved the other. Before things could get worse, he stepped in. Hey, he said softly, not shouting, but his tone made both boys stop. What's worth fighting over? The boys didn't answer. They looked embarrassed. One muttered something about borrowed money. The man nodded slowly. Money comes and goes. Pride too. But you know what stays? The kind of person you choose to be. He didn't lecture, just said those words and handed them each a soda from his bag. The boys exchanged a glance, then both laughed awkwardly. The fight was forgotten. What surprised everyone was what happened next. That same afternoon, the boys showed up at his house, helping him repaint the fence. When neighbors asked why, one of them said, "He talked to us like we mattered." It was such a simple thing, yet it spread through the block like a warm breeze. People started dropping by the man's house more often, to ask advice, borrow tools, or just talk. He never turned anyone away. He didn't act like a hero. He listened. And when he spoke, it was with quiet wisdom that made people think. Even those who had once stayed away from community matters started coming around. The air of the block began to feel lighter. There was less shouting, fewer arguments, and more laughter on the sidewalks. But with every bit of peace that came, Mr. Don's pride burned hotter. He didn't understand how someone who never demanded attention was getting more respect than he had after years of hard work. A week later, something unexpected happened. Late one evening, the power went out across the block. The streetlights died and the whole place went dark. People came outside with flashlights and candles, confused and a little nervous. The quiet man appeared carrying a large lantern. "Everyone all right?" he asked calmly. He started checking on each house, making sure no one was hurt. He found a few kids scared of the dark and stayed with them until the lights flickered back on an hour later. By morning, everyone was talking about how helpful he had been. An elderly woman even said she hadn't felt that safe in years. When Mr. Don overheard, he slammed his hand on the counter in frustration. He decided to pay the man another visit. That afternoon, he walked over with a forced smile. "You've been busy again," he said. The man nodded. "Just trying to help where I can." Mr. Don crossed his arms. "You don't have to fix everything, you know. People around here can handle their own problems." The man looked at him gently. "I'm not fixing everything. Just the things I can." There was no challenge in his voice, but that calm tone made Mr. Don feel small. He didn't reply. After that day, things got tense. Mr. Don began telling people that maybe the quiet man had a hidden reason for being so helpful. "Nobody does all that for free," he'd say. Some believed him, but most just shrugged. They'd seen enough to trust the quiet man's heart. One Saturday morning, the local community center announced a small fair for kids. Games, food stalls, and music. Everyone was excited. When the big day came, the weather was perfect and families filled the street. The quiet man helped set up tables and made sure the older folks had chairs in the shade. As the music played and laughter echoed, Mr. Don showed up late, dressed sharply as always. He greeted people, but this time their smiles were polite, not warm. For the first time, he realized the block no longer revolved around him. Toward the end of the fair, one of the organizers got up to thank everyone. She smiled at the crowd and said, "And a special thanks to our new neighbor, who reminded us what community really means." Everyone turned toward the quiet man, clapping. He looked embarrassed, just smiled and waved a little. Mr. Don stood in the back, his face unreadable. Inside, something twisted. Not exactly anger, but a deep sense of loss. For years, he had been the one people looked up to. Now they were looking somewhere else. That night, long after the fair ended, the quiet man sat on his porch sipping tea. The street was peaceful. A few kids rode their bikes home, and somewhere music played softly from an open window. He smiled, content. Across the street in his office, Mr. Don sat staring at the dark road. He couldn't stop thinking about how easily things had changed. He didn't hate the man, not really, but he couldn't shake the feeling that his place in the world was slipping away. The next day, he tried to get back to normal. He checked on his stores, talked to his workers, and greeted customers. But something was off. People were polite but distant. They no longer looked at him with the same admiration. They respected him, sure, but it felt more like habit than genuine warmth. Later that afternoon, he saw the quiet man helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries. The old woman laughed and patted him on the shoulder like he was family. Mr. Don stood there watching, realizing something painful. People didn't fear the quiet man. They loved him. That evening, as the sky turned orange and gold, Mr. Don walked slowly past the man's house. The quiet man was watering plants. They nodded at each other. There was no hostility, just an unspoken understanding between two very different men. The block was changing. It wasn't just about who owned what anymore or who people listened to. It was about trust. It was about kindness. The quiet man hadn't taken power. He'd earned respect in a way Mr. Don never had. But deep inside, Mr. Don wasn't ready to let go. He told himself it was just a phase, that people would come around again. Still, something inside him whispered that the balance had shifted for good. That night, the block glowed softly under the streetlights. The quiet man sat outside reading a book. From every house came the sound of laughter, the smell of dinner, the hum of life moving forward. He smiled to himself, unaware that while he was bringing peace to others, he had also awakened something restless in Mr. Don, something that would soon come to light. And though the street looked calm on the surface, a quiet tension was growing underneath, setting the stage for the day everyone would finally find out who really ran the block. The morning started quietly, like any other. The block was waking up slowly, shop doors creaking open, kids running late for school, and the smell of breakfast drifting from open windows. It felt peaceful, but beneath that calm something was changing. People could feel it, though no one said anything out loud. Mr. Don had been restless all week. He watched from his store window as the quiet man moved about, greeting neighbors, fixing little things, and talking with people who used to come to Mr. Don for advice. Every smile, every laugh that wasn't directed at him, bothered him more than he cared to admit. By now, everyone on the block respected the quiet man. He had become part of their lives without even trying. If someone was sick, he'd show up with groceries. If a kid needed help with homework, he'd sit on the porch and explain patiently. He had no title, no authority, but somehow everyone listened to him. Mr. Don didn't like it one bit. The way he saw it, the man was taking his place piece by piece. And the worst part was, he wasn't even doing it on purpose. That made it harder to fight. One Friday afternoon, Mr. Don decided enough was enough. He was tired of watching the block slip out of his hands. He told himself it wasn't about jealousy. It was about respect. People have to remember who built this place, he muttered under his breath as he locked up his shop. He planned to confront the quiet man at the weekend community meeting. It wasn't an official meeting, just neighbors gathering at the park to discuss street repairs and local issues. The quiet man had been helping organize it, and almost everyone was going to be there. When the day arrived, the park was full. Kids played on the swings, families chatted under trees, and a long table held homemade food. There was a light mood in the air, laughter, music, the feeling of togetherness that had slowly returned to the block. The quiet man stood near the center, helping a group of teenagers set up chairs. He smiled as he worked, not noticing the tension building across the park where Mr. Don stood, watching him closely. When the meeting began, people talked about cleaning projects, safety lights, and a plan to repaint old buildings. Every few minutes, someone would turn to the quiet man and ask his opinion. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened carefully. Finally, Mr. Don couldn't take it anymore. He cleared his throat loudly. The chatter stopped. All eyes turned toward him. "Can I say something?" he asked, his tone sharp but steady. The quiet man nodded. "Of course," Mr. Don stepped forward, his voice rising. "I've been living here for over 20 years. I've helped build this block, kept it safe, made sure everyone had what they needed. But lately," he paused, glancing around. "Lately, people seem to forget who kept this place running. Everyone's looking to someone new. Someone who just showed up and started fixing fences like that makes him a leader." A murmur spread through the crowd. Some people looked down, others exchanged awkward glances. The quiet man stood still, listening, his expression calm. Mr. Don continued, louder this time. "You all act like he's some kind of saint. But does anyone really know who he is? Where he came from? Why he's here. The words hung in the air like thick smoke. The quiet man could feel every pair of eyes on him waiting for an answer. He took a slow breath and then said softly, "You're right. No one really knows me, but that doesn't matter. I didn't come here to lead anyone. I just wanted to live in a good place and do my part." Mr. Don frowned. "That sounds nice, but people don't just change a whole neighborhood for no reason. There's always something behind it." The quiet man looked at him for a moment, then smiled slightly. "There's a reason behind everything good, Mr. Don. It's just not always about power." The crowd was silent. The air felt heavy. Mr. Don's jaw tightened. He wasn't expecting that kind of calm answer. He wanted a reaction, a fight, something that would prove he was still in charge. But the quiet man's calmness made him feel small, almost childish. A woman from the crowd spoke up. "He's helped my mother when she was sick. He didn't ask for anything, not even thanks." Another neighbor added, "He fixed my porch after the storm. Didn't even tell anyone he did it." Voices rose, one after another. Story after story poured out. Everyone had something kind to say. The quiet man stood there, humbled and silent. Mr. Don felt his face heat up. The people he had once controlled with favors were now defending someone else, someone who never asked for loyalty. He forced a smile, trying to hide his frustration. "Well," he said tightly, "I guess you've all made up your minds about who you want running things." The quiet man shook his head gently. "No one's running anything. This isn't about control. It's about being there for each other. Isn't that what community means?" That simple line changed the whole mood. People nodded. The tension broke, replaced by quiet agreement. Mr. Don looked around and saw that he'd lost their attention. They weren't against him. They just didn't need him the way they used to. He turned and walked away, his shoes crunching on the gravel path. The laughter and chatter returned behind him, but it sounded distant, hollow. The quiet man watched him go, his heart heavy. He didn't want to embarrass anyone. He knew pride could be a hard thing to lose. Later that night, the block was quiet again. Lights glowed in windows and a soft breeze carried the scent of rain. The quiet man sat on his porch, lost in thought. He didn't enjoy being the center of attention. All he ever wanted was peace, for himself and for others. Across the street, Mr. Don sat alone in his shop, staring at old photos on the wall. Pictures of the early days, grand openings, block parties, smiling faces beside him. Back then, everyone had looked up to him. He wasn't sure when that changed. Maybe it wasn't about the quiet man at all. Maybe it was about time and how people grow tired of fear, even gentle fear. As the hours passed, he remembered the question the quiet man had asked him in front of everyone. "When was the last time you did something good without expecting credit for it?" Those words echoed in his mind, the truth stung. He realized that most of the things he did were about staying important, not about helping. He'd forgotten what it meant to care without expecting something back. The next day, he didn't show up to his store. People noticed but didn't ask much. The quiet man, however, stopped by in the afternoon. He knocked on the door, and when Mr. Don opened it, he handed him a cup of coffee. "I didn't mean to embarrass you yesterday," he said quietly. "You've done a lot for this place. I just think people needed to remember why they started caring in the first place." Mr. Don looked at the cup for a moment, then sighed. "Maybe I needed to remember that too." They sat together on the front steps, drinking in silence. The tension between them slowly melted. For the first time they talked, really talked. About the old days, the people who'd moved away, and the things they both wanted for the block. As the sun began to set, they watched kids running through sprinklers, laughing and shouting. It was the sound of life, of a neighborhood finding joy again. "You know," Mr. Don said quietly, "I thought running this block meant being in charge. I didn't realize it could mean something else." The quiet man smiled. "It always means something else. It's never about power. It's about people." From that moment, something changed between them. They weren't friends yet, but they weren't enemies anymore either. It was the beginning of understanding. Fragile, but real. That night, the streetlights flickered on, casting soft gold light over the block. The quiet man sat on his porch again, the same calm look on his face. Across the street, Mr. Don turned off the lights in his shop and stood by the window, watching the block he'd once ruled start to breathe freely again. Neither of them said a word, But both knew things would never go back to how they were. The balance of the block had shifted for good, not through anger or force, but through quiet kindness and the simple power of doing good without expecting anything in return. It was the night everyone began to truly understand. The block didn't need a ruler anymore. It needed a heart. And without even meaning to, the quiet man had become exactly that. Weeks passed after the meeting in the park, and life on the block started to feel different. People seemed lighter, more at ease. The tension that once hung in the air had faded. Neighbors talked again. Kids played outside without fear, and for the first time in years, laughter carried down the street long after sunset. The quiet man had become a familiar part of everyone's day. He was always around, never in a hurry. He'd stop to chat with the old couple who sold vegetables on the corner, or help someone carry groceries up the stairs. He didn't ask for anything in return, and that made people respect him even more. But even as things seemed peaceful, there was still a sense of mystery about him. No one really knew where he came from or what he did before moving there. People had stopped asking because he didn't like talking about himself. Still, curiosity had a way of hanging around. One afternoon, while most people were at work, a car pulled up near his house. It wasn't the kind of car people on that block usually saw, shiny black and expensive. A woman stepped out dressed neatly, carrying a folder. She knocked on his door and he came out with his usual calm smile. They spoke quietly for a few minutes. Then she handed him the folder, shook his hand, and left. By evening, everyone on the block had heard about the car. They didn't mean to gossip, but on a street where everyone knew everyone, secrets didn't stay hidden for long. "I saw her give him papers," one neighbor whispered. "She looked important," another added. "Maybe he's in trouble," someone said, and the rumor began to grow. The quiet man, however, went about his day as if nothing had happened. He still helped people, still smiled when he walked down the street. But deep inside, he knew that soon, people would know more about him than he'd planned to share. 2 days later, a local reporter came to the neighborhood. She said she was doing a story about community rebuilding, how some areas that were once struggling were now thriving again. She'd heard about their block and wanted to see what had changed. The neighbors were proud to show her around. As she walked the streets, she noticed something rare, people helping one another without being asked, kids cleaning sidewalks, small gardens blooming in places that used to be filled with trash. It was clear this wasn't luck. Someone had sparked it. When she asked who started it all, nearly everyone pointed to the quiet man's house. The reporter smiled. "Seems like he's made quite an impact." She knocked on his door later that afternoon. He welcomed her in politely, offering her tea. She asked about his life, his work, and how he managed to turn an entire neighborhood around without running a single meeting or holding any position. He hesitated. He never liked talking about himself, but the way she asked, calm and respectful, made him open up just a little. "I didn't do anything special," he said. "I just did what I thought was right." People were already good at heart. They just needed to remember it. The reporter smiled but kept pressing gently. "Still, you've done something most people couldn't. There must be a reason you moved here." He looked down at his cup for a moment. Then he said softly, "I wanted peace. I spent years working in a world that forgot what that word means. So I came here to start over," that was all he said. He didn't mention what kind of work he'd done or why he left. A few days later, the article came out. The headline read, "The Quiet Man Who Revived a Forgotten Block." It talked about the changes, the unity, and how one man's kindness had inspired a community. It didn't mention his past, just his actions. People loved it. They felt proud. But what caught everyone's attention was a small detail at the bottom of the article. The reporter had written, "Before moving here, the man once ran a private foundation that funded local schools, parks, and youth programs across the city. He left it behind to live a simpler life." That single line changed everything. By the next morning, the whole block knew. The man they'd thought was just a quiet neighbor was actually someone who had once helped countless people through his work. People were stunned. "He's the one behind those community centers?" someone asked. "My cousin used to go to one of those," another said. "He gave scholarships to kids who couldn't afford school." Word spread fast. By noon, people were knocking on his door to thank him. He smiled, embarrassed by all the attention. "I didn't want anyone to know," he kept saying. It wasn't about that. But it was too late. The truth had come out, and it changed the way people saw him. Not in a bad way, but with deeper respect. Even Mr. Don heard about it. When he read the article, he sat in silence for a long time. All this time, he had thought the man was trying to take his place, trying to outshine him. Now he realized the man had already done more for others long before moving there, and he'd never said a word about it. That evening, Mr. Don went to the quiet man's house. He stood at the gate for a moment, unsure if he should knock. Finally, he did. When the man opened the door, Mr. Don said quietly, "I read about you. Guess I owe you an apology." The man smiled kindly. "No apology needed. I never came here to take anything from anyone." Mr. Don nodded. "Yeah, I see that now. You came here to give." They stood there in silence for a while. The street behind them buzzed with life. Kids laughing, neighbors talking, music playing faintly from a window. It felt different that night. After that day, things between them changed completely. Mr. Don started helping more, not to stay in control, but because he wanted to. The two men began working together quietly, organizing small cleanups, helping families in need, making sure the street stayed safe. People noticed. The block that once had two men trying to lead it in different ways now had two men working side by side for the same goal. The quiet man never talked about his past again. He didn't want people to think of him as some rich man or hero. He just wanted to belong. But the respect he earned never faded. When he walked down the street, people smiled with genuine warmth. Kids waved. Even strangers who moved in heard about the man who changed everything before they even met him. One afternoon, the reporter returned to the block to see how things were going. She was amazed to see even more improvements. New benches, murals painted by local kids, and a small park being built where an abandoned lot used to be. She met the quiet man again and said, "You've started something much bigger than you think." He chuckled. "No, they started it. I just reminded them they could." That night, a small gathering was held at the community center. People wanted to celebrate how far they'd come. There were lights, food, and laughter. When the quiet man arrived, the crowd clapped and cheered. He tried to wave it off, but someone handed him a microphone. He looked at the faces around him, the same faces that had once been strangers and were now family. He spoke softly, but every word carried meaning. "I didn't come here to lead anyone," he said. "I came here to find peace, but what I found was something even better. A place where people care again. You don't need someone to run this block. You just need to remember that this block runs because of you." The crowd went silent, and then applause filled the room. People smiled, some with tears in their eyes. Mr. Don stood in the back, clapping the loudest. He wasn't the man he used to be. For the first time in a long while, he felt proud without needing credit. As the night went on, music played, and people danced under the soft glow of string lights. The quiet man stood near the doorway, looking out at the block. It looked alive, full of laughter, full of love. He smiled to himself, feeling the peace he had been searching for. What no one knew was that this was only the beginning. The quiet man's story wasn't just about helping one block. It was about reminding everyone what true strength looked like. Not power, not control, but kindness that moved quietly like a breeze, gentle, steady, and unstoppable. Months passed, and the block had completely transformed. What used to be a quiet, forgotten street had turned into a living, breathing community. The small park was now filled with flowers, painted benches, and laughter from children who played until sunset. The walls that were once covered with dull paint and graffiti were now covered with bright murals telling the story of their neighborhood, a story of change, kindness, and second chances. The quiet man still lived in the same small house at the corner. He never moved, never changed his way of life. He still woke up early, swept the sidewalk, and greeted every neighbor he met. But now, when he walked down the street, everyone smiled back with genuine warmth. He had become the heart of the block without ever trying to be. It was a warm morning in early summer when he noticed something different. A new family had moved into one of the old buildings. The father was polite but looked tired, like someone carrying too much on his shoulders. The mother smiled, though her eyes showed worry. They had two small children who seemed shy, staying close to their parents as they unpacked. Later that day, the quiet man walked over with a small basket of fruit. "Welcome to the block," he said kindly. The family thanked him, and he could see a bit of relief in their faces. They were strangers, but he knew how it felt to start over. He told them about the park, the local store, and the evening gatherings. Before he left, he said softly, "You'll like it here. It's a good place now." And it was true. The block had become more than a street. It was a family. People looked out for one another. If someone was short on groceries, others helped. If someone was sick, neighbors checked in. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that made it special. As time went on, the quiet man noticed more people moving in. Some came because of the stories they'd heard, about the block that turned itself around. Reporters wrote more articles. City officials came by to see how it happened. They asked questions, took notes, even took pictures. But what they didn't understand was that it wasn't something that could be copied with plans or money. It was built on trust, and that couldn't be bought. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the buildings, the quiet man sat on his porch watching kids chase each other through the street. Mr. Don joined him carrying 2 cups of coffee. They sat quietly for a while, just watching life go by. "You know," Mr. Don said after a moment, "I used to think I ran this block. I really did. I thought being in charge meant people had to listen to me, but I was wrong." "You never tried to lead, yet everyone followed you." The quiet man smiled faintly. "I didn't want to lead. I just wanted peace. But I think people follow kindness because they feel it's safe." Mr. Don nodded slowly. "Yeah, I see that now." The streetlights came on and soft music played from a radio somewhere down the block. The sound mixed with laughter, the hum of conversation, and the faint smell of food from nearby kitchens. It was a simple evening, but it felt like everything they'd worked for was right there in front of them. Weeks later, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived in the quiet man's mailbox. It was from the city council. They wanted to honor him for his contribution to the neighborhood. They were planning to name the new park after him. He stared at the letter for a long time, unsure how to feel. He didn't do what he did for attention or recognition. He just wanted to live quietly and do good in his own way. That evening, he walked to the park where a few kids were still playing. He watched them laugh and chase one another around the swings. He thought about how far this place had come, how it once felt hopeless, how people used to avoid eye contact, and how now everyone seemed connected. He folded the letter and put it in his pocket. He decided he would go to the ceremony, not for himself, but for the people who made the block what it was, because the truth was he didn't really run the block. They all did. The day of the ceremony was sunny, with a soft breeze that carried the smell of flowers from the park. Neighbors gathered, children held balloons, and local musicians played gentle tunes. The mayor gave a speech about community and change, but the quiet man barely listened. His mind was on the faces in the crowd, the same faces that once looked uncertain and tired, now filled with pride and hope. When they called his name to speak, he stepped up slowly, his hands in his pockets. The crowd clapped and cheered, but he raised his hand slightly, signaling for calm. He didn't like long speeches. He preferred simple words. "I don't deserve this," he began, his voice steady but humble. "I didn't fix this place alone. Every one of you did. You took care of each other. You made this block alive again. I only reminded you of what was already here." He paused, looking around at everyone, at Mr. Don, the shopkeeper, the kids, the new family at the end of the street. "This park," he said, "belongs to all of you. It's yours to protect, to keep growing, to make better every day." Then he smiled, the same gentle smile everyone had come to know. "You see, no one really runs the block. The block runs itself through the hands, hearts, and kindness of the people who live here." The crowd clapped again, louder this time, some even wiping away tears. Mr. Don walked up and gave him a firm pat on the back. "You'll have to get used to people cheering for you. he joked. The quiet man chuckled. I'd rather they just keep being good to each other. After the ceremony, kids played around the new park sign, which now bore his name in simple letters. He stayed for a while, talking to people, listening to their plans. Someone wanted to start a reading club, another planned to open a small cafe. The energy was contagious. He loved seeing others take ownership. As the evening sun turned golden, he started walking home. Halfway down the street, he stopped and turned back for one last look at the park. The laughter, the joy, the sound of life. It all reminded him why he had chosen this block. It wasn't about starting over anymore. It was about belonging. Over the next few months, life continued to move forward. The block kept thriving and more people joined the movement. Small businesses opened, families settled in, and even nearby streets began to change, inspired by what they saw. The quiet man became a local legend, though he never liked that word. To him, he was just another neighbor. One morning, he woke up early, as he always did, and took a walk. The air was cool and the street was still quiet. He passed the park and saw a group of teenagers repainting the benches. He smiled and waved. They waved back, one of them shouting, "We're keeping it nice for you." He laughed softly. "Keep it nice for yourselves," he replied. When he returned home, he sat on his porch with a cup of tea. Mr. Don came by again, this time carrying a small book. "What's that?" the quiet man asked. "It's a record," Mr. Don said. "People are writing down stories about what this block used to be like, before and after. I figured you might want to add something." The quiet man took the book, flipped through its pages, and saw stories written by his neighbors. Stories of struggles, changes, and moments of hope. He smiled at each one, touched by how much people had grown. When he reached the end, there was a blank page. He picked up a pen and thought for a moment before writing just one simple line. "Kindness runs the block." He closed the book and handed it back. Mr. Don read the line and nodded slowly. "That's perfect," he said. The quiet man leaned back, watching the sun rise higher over the rooftops. The world was still far from perfect, but here on this little block things were good. People cared. They looked out for each other, and that was enough. As the day went on, laughter filled the street again. The block was alive, not because of one person, but because everyone had learned what it truly meant to belong. And though they often said he was the one who changed everything, he knew the truth deep down. He hadn't run the block. He had simply reminded them who really did, and the people. Always the people.